To protect our own selves and our own people, it's time to make war illegal. War is not a necessary evil, it's an unnecessary evil. And we can protect ourselves in the world without war. My name is Nadine Hoover, and I live in Western New York. I spend a lot of time in Asia, West Pacific, and into the Middle East, and focus mostly on peace and the fact that peace is possible and looking into what we need to do to bring it about. I created Conscience Studio, which is a publishing company that tries to publish materials and provide training for how to do the work of peace in the world. I'm the director of The Power of Goodness, which is a global story pool of stories of nonviolence and reconciliation, and I coordinate Friends Peace teams in Asia West Pacific. After World War II, to the Vietnam War, we increased the efficiency of a bullet. And the way we did that was we learned how to break the human conscience. And we are doing more and more activities in war that are about breaking our human conscience. We're getting more information today, not just about PTSD, but also about moral injury. We're losing more soldiers to suicide than we are to combat. And so it's to protect our own selves and our own people. It's time to make war illegal. War is not a necessary evil, it's an unnecessary evil. And we can protect ourselves in the world without war. If we had treated, in the United States, if the United States had treated 9/11 as a crime, we would have united the world. In 2001, I had spent 8 years building science libraries, science laboratories and libraries in the Islamic school systems of Southeast Asia and the madrasa. And the Islamic community was horrified. If we had treated 9/11 as a crime, the entire Islamic world would have come behind us. We created this global animosity because of the way we reacted to that. And so because of the closeness of the people on the planet, our ability to move, transport, communication, we can go out and build relationships that can protect us. One of the amazing things is that peace is absolutely possible. So I think the really important thing first is to get in touch with that, to know how important it is to find that place in yourself where you actually know that it's possible, right? And when we know it's possible and it's necessary. And when you know it's possible and you know it's necessary, then we can make it so. We know things now we didn't know before. I came up in the sort of the peace movement, the civil rights movement. We didn't know about trauma. We didn't understand the mechanisms of trauma and how it was affecting us. And we're just now growing into that. And those tools are absolutely important because to bring about peace, we have to be able to face the hard things without them taking us down, and we have to learn how to recognize them for what they are and how to say no to them, and we need to recognize the good things and be able to say yes. And if looking at the hard things takes us down and paralyzes us, then we just get off track too quickly. But we know a lot about that we didn't know before. We know a lot about how violence erodes cognition and that we need to engage in creative developmental play to get our minds flexible in order to meet the challenges. You know, many school settings and many work settings are getting narrower and narrower and more efficient and focused, but they aren't flexible enough to meet the creative demands. But we were learning so much more about these pieces that things are possible now that might not have been possible 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so, you know, we don't say, well, a cell phone isn't possible because we never had one before. We don't say that something technologically isn't possible because we never had it before. I think that there are things that are possible now in making peace that were not possible before. The things that we're doing that are incredibly effective are very, very simple. They're so simple that it's hard to get people to stop and pay enough attention to them. Building friendships, learning people's names, and not shying away from that. People say, oh, I'm not good at that. That's because we don't do it. You know, learning people's names, sharing something personal about ourselves, and finding out something personal about other people. Positive adjectives are amazingly powerful. And people are like, well, that's kind of trivial. I've got bigger problems than just playing with positive adjectives. And so I say, well, we're going to go around. My name's Nadine, an N. How many positive adjectives can you think of that start with N? And if you're having problems thinking of some, that's probably the result of stress and violence. Violence erodes vocabulary. It drives, people are using about 60 to 70,000 words in their day-to-day vocabulary if they're living in peace and they're fairly educated. If you get put in a condition of violence for any length of time, it drops to about 10%. And most of those words are very negative. So if it's hard for you to think of positive adjectives, then that's a self-assessment tool. If it's hard for you to use them, that's a self-assessment tool. If the stress starts to go up or there's a problem that's coming in, try to think of 3 to 5 positive adjectives and use them in the next paragraph and see if it stops. I mean, it's a very, very simple tool, but it will dramatically change an environment. So we work on very simple things like that. We work on the agreements and the friendships. We work on communication, on learning how to speak up, on learning how to share the speaking, being sensitive about inviting everyone to have a voice. We do a lot with listening, and that's fairly familiar to people. Listening's nonverbal. You need to stop in your mind, you need to stop in your body, you need to turn towards the person, you need to try to have some empathy and track what they're trying to say and what they mean. But then we take it a step further. If you try to listen to things that are hard to hear, either really horrific stories or things, feedback to yourself that you really don't want, that you aren't happy about, one of the things we do is we pay attention to our core selves. We even draw our core selves. Who am I when my guard's down and I'm just totally alive in myself? And we draw a picture and we have everybody do that and we put it up on the wall. This is who we are, individually and collectively. This is who we are as a people. Now, when I'm listening and I'm listening to something hard, can I stay in my core self? Can I breathe? Can I stay relaxed? Eric Guthrie, who coined the term secondary trauma, talks about taking your hip bones and your sit bones and finding the bottom of your abdomen. Take a big breath, let go, and let go in the bottom of the abdomen. Can I breathe, relax in the abdomen, and stay in my core self and remember the goodness and capability of the person speaking? Focus on their core self. This person is good and capable. If they're talking about something horrific, I can just be here, relaxed and non-anxious in my core self. I don't have to rescue you. That's so disrespectful. If I sit here and know you're capable, you can actually communicate to me about really difficult things and not come out of it feeling helpless. If I try to rescue you, it's almost like saying, I know you can't handle this. It's very disrespectful. But also, if you're sharing things with me and talking about my privilege or the way I've hurt other people or things that are hard for me to look at, if I can just breathe and remember my core self and remember the other person's core self and that they are genuine, you know, I'm going to listen to them and I'm going to believe that what they're saying is true for them. Asking the question, what if it were true? What if what they're saying is true? And then listening in myself and then staying in my core self and sharing back if that's true for me also or not. So we have these practices, and this is really learning a lot about trauma and the way that trauma sets in when we freeze. Trauma sets in when the needs feel like they outstrip the resources. So if we stay in touch with love, then the needs never outstrip the resources. The power of love outstrips everything. And if we can stay grounded in that, there's always a resource. You can always be curious. You can always try to find a way forward. And that is the antidote to trauma. So we're learning a lot of skills around that. Also, trauma sets in when we're alone. We might not physically be alone, but we feel alone. When the needs outstrip the resources, it's usually when we get caught alone and there's nobody with us. And so asking for companion, asking for somebody to pay attention to me, giving my attention to somebody else is actually a contradiction to the trauma itself, right? I go, oh, no, I'm going to cry and I'm going to do all my healing so I can come, and I'm going to do it alone, just reinforces that aloneness. So we're doing things more together, building companionship in the work and things like that. And the final piece, there's a book from the Early Years Organization in Northern Ireland, From Conflict to Peace Building, The Power of Early Childhood Initiatives. And maybe we're given children and grandchildren every 20 years in order to get us back to the basics. And if we can get adults, parents, grandparents, teachers, to play for even like an hour a week, in 6 months, they're so different that and this is developmental play, like activities that build cognition and capacity. They're so different from the rest of their family and their community, it'll split families, it'll split communities. So we're doing a lot more work on how to have a dialogue within the community while we do this. But it's hard to describe the power of this play. The other day I was looking at an audience in the United States of a few hundred people, and I looked at the faces and I'm like, you all look traumatized. Like, I'm used to seeing this in a war zone. I said to them, are you feeling tired a lot? Are you having problems concentrating? Are you feeling like you can't remember stuff? Is it hard to make decisions? You don't want to take responsibility for things? This is trauma. And so we know that when people hear the stories of trauma, that eventually when they treat people with trauma, eventually you start showing the symptoms of trauma. And this is called secondary trauma. So just like when people came together in cities and we had to learn how to wash our hands and have sanitation in order to live together like that, if we're going to have this exposure to media and what's going on in the world, we have to learn how to inoculate ourselves from trauma. It's not a psychological thing. It's a public health issue. It's something that we need to bring into our homes and make as ordinary as having soap at the bathroom sink. And so these kinds of tools are really critical to reconstituting our ability to see what's wrong and face it without it taking us down, but also to creatively, flexibly create solutions. Creates very powerful people.